Sharing about what we do is at the core of every endeavor. That's even more true for the nonprofit and social entrepreneurial space. In this episode, Adam Walker shares tips for sharing about what you do, as well as some things to think about as you develop your online presence. He's recently launched a podcast about nonprofit digital marketing, so if you're looking to learn more about that, be sure to visit sideways8.com to listen in.
Welcome to the Social Good Instigators Podcast, where your host, Kirsten Bullock, interviews leaders of social entrepreneurship ventures who share what's working. Please add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or iTunes. Now, let's get on with the show.
Hi, Adam. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Well, you can read Adam's full bio on the podcast page, but there are just a few items I'd like to highlight. 1, he's a father of 5 and loves having adventures with his family. 2, he's the co-founder of Sideways8, a digital agency based out of Atlanta. And he runs 48 in 48, which puts together events where they'll build 48 websites for 48 nonprofits in 48 hours. All in all, Adam, it sounds like you stay really super busy.
I don't claim busy, but I do claim productive. So how about that? We'll go with productive.
That sounds fabulous. I think sometimes we do overuse the word busy, and we seem to glamorize having too much to do in too little time.
Yeah, so I actually recently wrote a blog post about that, which is why I try to be very careful about when I say that. And so I was a blog post about why I don't use the word busy anymore. And it kind of hints exactly at what you just mentioned, where I actually do a lot of stuff, an unusual amount of stuff, I think, in certain ways, but I really don't consider myself busy, and I just sort of manage my time, and I could definitely consider myself full in a very good way.
Mm-hmm. So how do you keep from passing that point of full and getting into swamped?
That's a great question. I set some pretty strict barriers for myself. So, for example, my morning time is sort of my time. I get up super early. I read. That's my time to read. It's my time to write on my personal blog. It's my time to sort of reflect a bit. It's also my time to work out. And that's, like I said, I've got 5 kids. And so that's sort of me time is that morning time. I usually then get started with work pre-8 o'clock. So I get kind of a jump on the day and feel really good about that as well. And then I've got a hard stop at 5 p.m. I go upstairs. I work from home most of the time. So I'm usually home in the afternoons doing calls. And I walk upstairs and we have dinner at 5 o'clock. And then I'm on dad time. And I go to bed super early because I get up super early, but I draw some hard lines in the sand, and if it can't be done by 5, it just can't be done.
I think that's a lesson that we can all learn.
It's a lesson I'm continually learning, but then some days I'm better at it than others, if I'm being truly honest. But I think a good majority of the days I cut the cord at 5 o'clock, leave the laptop in the basement, and head on upstairs and get ambushed.
Sounds like fun. Now 48 and 48. That sounds like a fantastic type event. Where did you first get the idea for that?
Yeah, so the idea came from my co-founder, Jeff Hillemeyer, and that sort of came about because Jeff led a digital agency. It was a pretty large digital agency, and he had encouraged his people at one point to volunteer for a nonprofit reading books to kids. And then he found, a lot of people actually did. They went and read books to kids. They liked it. And he was walking through the office like a year later and realized that some people were still actively involved with that charity reading books to kids. And he realized that a lot of these people that worked for him want to volunteer, they want to be involved in their community, but they're rarely asked to be involved in their community. And so he wanted to create an event where professionals, digital marketing professionals in particular, could come and could volunteer their time and their services and make an enormous impact on the community. And so he sort of bounced around this idea to some degree with me, where it's saying like, oh, hey, Adam, can we do 5 websites in a weekend? Well, sure, we can do 5. Yeah, that's not a big deal. And well, if we can do 5, how about 10? And how about 20? How about 30? How about 40? Can we do 50 sites in a weekend? Well, probably, but that's getting a little scary. He's like, how about 48 in 48? I'm like, all right, let's give it a shot. And so I sort of buckled up and went along for the ride. And here we are, 2+ years later. And we've gone from being in 1 city. This year we'll be in 4 cities. Next year we'll be in somewhere between 4 and 7 cities, sort of depending on how things shake out. So things are growing and going very well.
Nice. So what's the how much bandwidth does it take to put together one of those weekends? Is it pretty time intensive?
Yeah, it is very time intensive. We're fortunate to have raised some funds and have the ability to have a staff to sort of man the day-to-day operations and really help make things happen. So the staff's really amazing. We've got 3 full-time staff people now, and they're constantly building relationships with donors. They're building relationships with kind of umbrella nonprofits that can help us get the word out. They build relationships with agencies in each city that we're going to. They're going to bring teams to the event, and they really pave the way for us to be able to go into those cities. And, some cities are easier to step into than others. Every city has its own sort of surprises where, it's one thing that wasn't a struggle in Atlanta is a huge struggle in Minneapolis, is not a struggle somewhere else. It's fascinating. And so every time we have to sort of shift and adapt a different approach and figure out what we're going to do next.
Where do you think you've seen the biggest success in growing 48 and 48?
Biggest success. It's been interesting. So, we did the event in Atlanta in 2015, not even sure if we could do an event. Like, we weren't even completely convinced, going into it, like, pretty sure this is going to work. And sure enough, we built 48 websites. And at the end of the event, we really weren't thinking about 2016 and weren't thinking beyond that. And at the end of the event, the volunteers were like, "Hey, you're doing this next year, right?" And Jeff and I kind of looked at each other like, "Yeah, we are," and that's sort of it was just so successful we could not do it next year. Yeah, and so that's kind of how it's been. And then we did New York the next year. We added New York. Well, if we can do it in Atlanta, can we do it in New York too? That's not our home turf. And sure enough, we can do it in New York. And the volunteers there were psyched about it. And can we do it again next year? Yeah, we can do it again next year. And so now we're in Atlanta, New York, Boston, and Minneapolis for the 3rd year. And Boston went really well. And so can we do it again next year in Boston? Sure, we can. And we just keep growing from there. So it's the enthusiasm of the volunteers has been remarkable, and I think that's really what's motivated us in a large way to keep things going.
With 48 and 48, what was your biggest struggle? What was the biggest surprise for you that you ran into that you weren't expecting?
The biggest surprise that we ran into in Atlanta the first year, and that we have frequently run into, is actually getting nonprofits in the door and through the process ready for a new website. So you'd think that you offer to give away 48 free websites to nonprofits and they would be beating down your door, and you'd have, several hundred entries, and people would jump through any hoops possible to get this done, because this is a pretty high value thing. I mean, we value the sites that we build at roughly, $25,000 a piece once you factor in all the training we do pre and post event and during the event, and you factor in all the professional services fees and things like that from these individuals. And so we expected they would just beat down the door, and then getting sponsors and volunteers would be difficult. And the exact opposite has proven to be true. Getting sponsors and volunteers has actually been less difficult, and it's still difficult, don't get me wrong, but not as difficult as getting in 48 nonprofits that have also gone through our entire process, because we do take them through a whole structured process that they've got to get through in order to be prepared to get the website. So city after city after city, that is almost always the very biggest struggle, which is still just absolutely surprising to me.
Mm-hmm. So now that you've done a few cities, have you seen some reasons why that might be?
So my theory is that nonprofits that are smaller, and by small I would define as anywhere from one part-time staff person up to, say, 20 staff people, they're so busy doing their work that they're not paying attention to what's around them. And so even though we're blasting out emails, even though United Way is partnering with us to send out emails, and Points of Light is sending out emails, and Hands On Atlanta, and all the different hands-on networks, that even though they're blasting out all these emails to these thousands of nonprofit professionals, I think they're just so inundated with what they're doing that they just don't see the opportunity that's there for them, and they just don't look up. And so we're trying to figure out ways to help them look up, essentially.
And that's easier said than done. And it goes back to the beginning of our conversation about busy.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to stop focusing for a moment on the here and now and begin looking, further into the future. But I think for nonprofits, that's one of the things that they have to do, is they have to stop and pause and say, okay, what I'm doing is great. How do I grow this? And in my mind, digital marketing is one of the most important steps that any nonprofit's going to take in that growth process. And we want to help with that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Everybody's communicating online now. I've just started a school program, and we don't get anything through the mail. Our acceptance letter came through email. It was
That's great.
It's been a long time since I was in school, so it's been a little bit of a shock for me. But yeah, digital is just the way of the way that we're I was about to say the way of the future, but it's really how we're operating right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what are some things that you've done to help organizations through that process? Or are you just pretty much working with the ones who are able to go through the steps?
Well, the basic process, we have 3 courses that we run a nonprofit through. Course number 1 is kind of the legal stuff, the technical setup, all of that sort of stuff that is relatively difficult to get through. And so what we do is we have a support staff member that helps them through that. So if they have questions, they have an email address they can submit that to. They can ask questions. We can give them feedback and help them sort of take the next step there. And then there's a course 2 and a course 3, where in course 2, we walk the nonprofits through a branding questionnaire and a content questionnaire so that we understand who this nonprofit is and what they're trying to accomplish with their website. And that's a pretty in-depth process that they walk through. And again, we've got somebody available on on the other end of an email address to help walk through and answer those questions as needed. And then course 3, they actually get a blank WordPress install site, and they get a little bit of training on how to basically copy and paste text and images into that site. And we have them build out pages, paste in the text and images there, and then that's the blank canvas on which we ultimately build the 48 sites during the weekend.
So it gets them used to it, so then they can maintain it, update content.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we've got a lot of training inside of the web built into the website. So there's actually, I think, about 50 to 70 training videos built into the back end of the website that would walk them through everything from how do I add an image to how do I create a page, how do I create a menu, all those sorts of things. All those training videos are covered in the back end of the site for them.
Fabulous. Now, as far as you've mentioned a lot of different partners that you're working with. Was that pretty easy to get the conversation started with them?
Yeah, I think so. So it's interesting. I've kind of got this working theory. I've got a lot of working theories. I'm not sure how baked any of them truly are. So I guess you can take them with a grain of salt. But I have this working theory that our vision for 48 and 48 is so sort of bold and so compelling. It really opens the door to a conversation with someone almost instantly. I mean, when we call up an agency or we call up a large food vendor or something, and we say, hey, look, we'd love to get some help. We're going to build 48 websites for 48 nonprofits in 48 hours. They go, really? Tell me more. And then it sparks a conversation because it's a bold and kind of crazy vision that we have been able to consistently pull off. And so I really think that the more nonprofits can have a bold vision that they can communicate really, really crystal clear, and the more compelling it is, the easier it is to open those conversations, even from a cold call or a cold email. So it's kind of, I think that's allowed us to open a lot of doors.
Yeah, let's linger on that a minute. That whole idea of a bold vision and 48 and 48 definitely has a ring to it. The nonprofits that you've worked with and built websites for, are there some taglines or ideas or concepts that you've run across that were a little unexpected that really worked?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So yes, there have been some, but there are none that are immediately within my memory. That's one of the benefits of having so many children and so many things is my memory is like Swiss cheese sometimes. So yes, there have. I mean, and honestly, that's actually part of the branding questionnaire that we try to help nonprofits through, because one of the things that I'm particularly passionate about is when I ask a nonprofit, what do you do? They should be able to very quickly articulate to me what they do. I would say in 20 seconds or less. And if they can't, then they need to go through a series of exercises to help them really crystallize and articulate what it is that they do and be able to share it in a compelling and compact way. And so, because you'd be shocked by how many even large nonprofits I talk with, and I say, what do you do? And then 10 minutes later, I still don't understand what they do. And We're both frustrated, you know?
Right.
And so we try to help the nonprofits through that. We try to ask them the right questions and help them think through it strategically so that once they do get to the event, there is that sort of elevator pitch that the team can understand and can integrate that into the website, and then it all sort of flows from there.
And I found too, a lot of organizations, they spend a lot of time talking about what they do and all the programs that they do. And really, people are wanting to know a really brief overview. Why are you doing what you're doing, and what's the impact that you're making on people?
Exactly.
Being able to articulate that. But I think too, a lot of nonprofits, they're so stuck in the weeds that it's hard to step back and see the whole picture.
Right. And sometimes what's nice about walking through sort of these exercises is it helps them to step back. And so you know, for the sake of your listeners that might be interested, so I mean, it's a really simple exercise to figure this out. So I say to a nonprofit, okay, write out absolutely everything that your nonprofit does. Like, if you can think of it, write it out. And whatever length that ends up being, let's say it's 2 pages, then I say, great, now write it out again in 1 page. And then if it's, you know, if that 1 page is 4 paragraphs, great. Now write it again in 2 paragraphs. Now write it again in 1 paragraph. Now write it again, you know, keep cutting it in half until you get back down to something between 5 to 15 words. And then you're pretty good at that point.
That sounds like a great way to do it. Oh yeah, it would be hard.
It's very difficult, but it really makes you realize what's at the core of what your nonprofit does. Because I mean, even for 48 and 48, I could tell you about all kinds of peripheral things that we do. We've designed a whole ton of logos at one event where we had some extra designers, and we've done all kinds of extra training and extra SEO work and content writing and all that stuff. But that's not really the point, is it? The point is we're building 48 websites for 48 nonprofits in 48 hours. And that's what's compelling. So that's what we stick with.
And the rest is still happening. And it's not that you're not doing it. It's just your primary focus is this. And if the other things happen, great.
Exactly. Yeah, the other things are great. Yeah. And they're even programs. And we even have other programs. Like we have a whole training program that we do for the nonprofits the day of the event. And it's called Snack and Learns. And we have a whole other online program that we do to train nonprofits globally. It's like basically an online conference. But again, those are peripherals to the main thing. And you have to keep the main thing, you know?
So in the work that you've done and your experience yourself leading a nonprofit, do you have any closing words of inspiration or encouragement for our listeners?
Yeah, I think I would encourage listeners to think big and to take some time to step back and think about what that really means. You know, so for us, we did 48 and 48, and that was amazing, and that was thinking big. And then we stepped back and we said, okay, now can we do twice as many? And we can. So now we step back and okay, can we do twice as many? And our ultimate vision is by 2025 we'd like to do 48 and 48 in 48 cities globally. And that's a pretty short timetable for that amount of cities to expand to, but we want to continue to push ourselves to really think big. And I would say for every nonprofit, think really big, and how can you push the boundaries of what your thinking is, and how can you share that vision in a really compelling way that motivates people to get behind what you're doing.
Fantastic. Well, Adam, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.
And thanks to our listeners for everything you do to make the world a better place.
Thanks for listening to the Social Good Instigators podcast with Kirsten Bullock. If you like what you just heard, we hope you'll check out our prior episodes, and that you'll pass along our web address, socialgoodinstigators.com, to your friends and colleagues in the social good sector.